I'm going to go ahead and deploy a virtual machine scale set. Once we get the scale set deployed, it's going to be a very basic scale set initially. It's not going to have an application. We'll take a look at how we deploy a scale set that actually has an application in it, and then take a look at one that's already deployed. So to begin, we're here in the marketplace. We're going to choose scale set and click on the option for a virtual machine scale set. Now, this is a pretty typical configuration. What you're doing here is deploying a group of virtual machines that are going to have the same configuration and allow Azure to bring additional virtual machines online and remove virtual machines based on the load or other criteria that you put in place. I'm going to call this one Web Front End. And we'll just follow the rules. Web Front End. It's going to be Windows Server 2016 Data Center. We can also choose other supported operating systems for a scale set. A resource group. Call this one Scale Set 1 just so I know where it is. Username, password. And then how many instances of this scale set do we want available? So I'm going to start off with a 4 virtual machine scale set. And then we can also look at the size that we want to make available for each node in the scale set. And you can see here that you've got many choices for the size of virtual machine that you want to have. We're going to go with the DS1V2, just one of the smaller ones. And then I don't want to go beyond 100 instances. If I do want to do that, we can actually enable it. And then, do we want to use managed disks? Again, the recommendation here is you should really always use managed disk unless you have a very particular disk configuration that you want to put in place. A public IP address name and a public DNS name. We call this one CJH Scale Set 1 as a public DNS name. And then I'm going to enable auto scale. Auto scale enables us to automatically add and remove virtual machines from the scale set based on criteria that we set. And when you do this for the marketplace, they give you this initial CPU criteria. So we're going to start off with a minimum number of 2, a maximum number of 10. Notice we're going to initially deploy with 4. So a minimum of 2, maximum of 10. And then we're going to use a CPU threshold of 75%. And if we get more than a 75% average CPU threshold, you can click on this, it tells you exactly what that is, then we'll go ahead and increase, and let's do an increase by 2. So if we go more than 75% average CPU, it'll add 2 additional VMs. If we drop below 25% CPU, we're going to drop 1 VM. And again, the tooltips give you an indication of what those items mean. And so we'll go ahead and click Create. So this will submit the deployment to deploy an initial 4 virtual machine Windows Server 2016 scale set. Now that's going to take a little bit. We're going to let it run and then come back and take a look at the results. So our scale set's now created. Let's go take a look at what we have. In the resource group, there's 4 objects. We have the network, we have the public IP, and then we have 2 things. We have a load balancer, and we'll be taking a look at load balancers in detail in a later section. So we're not going to spend a great deal of time here for now, other than to say that a load balancer and a scale set go hand in hand. As you scale up and scale down a scale set, it will update the load balancer's rules accordingly so that all available scale set nodes are available to the load balancer. And then we have our actual scale set itself. If we click on this and look at the overview, we can see what the CPU percentage is. Right now it's very low. The scale set doesn't have any applications installed, so there's nothing to really generate CPU. And if we come down and look at our instances, we can see that there are currently 4 instances running, which was what we initially chose to deploy with. If we look at our scaling, here we can find the rules that determine whether or not how many nodes are active in this scale set at a time. So for example, we have a minimum instance limit of 2. which is what we set during deployment, maximum of 10. And we have the two rules that say when the CPU is greater than 75%, will increase by 2. When it's less than 25%, we will decrease by 1. Under storage, we have the storage configuration where we can see that it's using premium SSD, and this is using managed storage. The operating system, and then the size. And here's an example of where things like update domains come into play. Let's say that we chose to resize the virtual machines in the scale set. It will implement the resizing one update domain at a time. So if I have 5 update domains and I have 10 virtual machines, 2 will be taken offline if it's necessary to change the size of the virtual machine, and then following those to the next 2, the next 2, and so on. So that's a good example of where the update domains configuration actually kicks in relative to a scale set. And then we have our options for monitoring and for alerts, which are pretty standard on most objects. We're not going to look at continuous delivery. That's a feature that application developers will take advantage of, and that's not really part of the scope of what we're dealing with right here. Now, if we come back to our scaling rules, this is where we can also manually adjust scaling. I've enabled auto scale. We're going to go ahead and disable it for now. We can re-enable auto scale if we want. We can see our instance count is now 4. Let's go ahead and change that to 8 and click Save. Says it failed. Ah, there we go. So I'm actually running out of my quota limits for this particular subscription. Again, we had mentioned in I guess a previous video about the notion of monitoring your quota limits, and I'm hitting a quota limit by trying to scale up to 7. So let's actually drop it down to 2. We just want to kind of demonstrate the effects of this. So we changed it to 2, and if we come back to our instances, as we refresh this kind of over a period of time, you'll eventually see 2 of these instances actually go away. So let's just refresh here. And you can see that number 2 and number 7 are now being deleted, so we're scaling back down to 2. To re-enable auto scale, it's simply a matter of coming back, enabling auto scale, and then choosing the criteria that you want to follow. So we can, for example, scale based on a metric. I can add and remove rules. So I don't need to do just CPU, for example. I can take rules such as let's say the max, let's do So I can add an additional rule. Let's say we want to go, not just the average, which the default is measured for 10 minutes. Let's say we reach a maximum CPU of 90%, I don't want to wait. I want it to immediately auto scale. So 90% for more than 1 minute. So 70% for, actually 5 is the minimum. So 70% for 10 minutes, or if we hit a maximum of 90 over a period of 5 minutes, we can also add an instance count then as well. So you can see you can begin to add these additional rules around when we do the scaling. You can also scale on different conditions. This is all based on CPU. We can also add scaling rules around different conditions. So for example, I go click here to add rule. We can choose different conditions such as my storage or any other resources that are available. So here I'm choosing the web front end. I can say, well, based on the storage account that's being used, we can actually select different metrics. So for example, we can select network conditions, disk conditions, or really any other criteria. So it's not just based on CPU. You can build a set of rules that represent when your application is under load and whatever condition represents load, and then scale as a result of that. So we're just going to throw all this away. I'm not going to keep these rules. And come back and check, and we should see that we are now down to 2 running instances. Now, we can also manage your scale sets in PowerShell. One of the common things you might want to do in PowerShell is write automation scripts to either increase or decrease the size of your scale set. And we can do this. So first of all, we're going to get our VM scale sets. We're going to need a couple of parameters to do this. Resource group name for this one is, go back and just verify. My resource group name is scale set 1. And then I need my scale set name, which is web front end. And we can look at it. And so it returns the properties of our scale set. You can see here that we have the capacity. So all we're going to do is adjust the capacity and then update the scale set. Let's adjust PowerShell here. And so if I look through the properties, you can kind of see the relationship. We've got the SKU, and as part of the SKU, we've got the capacity. So SKU.capacity equals, let's bump that to 4, which is what it was before. And then we're going to update our scale set. There we go. Go ahead and run that command, and it's going to go behind the scenes now and make the change to the scale set and bump the capacity from 2 up to 4. And if we come back to the overview here, look at our instances. Here in just a few minutes, we should see 2 new instances being deployed. So we'll give that just a couple of minutes to kick in. So we can see here it's beginning to deploy the additional VMs to move it up to a scale of 4. And also, interestingly enough, during this time, and the time from I created it to now, it's identified that there's actually a newer version of the image being used. And so while it's updating it from 2 to 4, it's also updating the version. So what you're seeing here is that 3 are being created, and the 2 existing instances have been noted as not running the latest version of the virtual machine, or the operating system in the virtual machine. So it's actually going to create 4 and decommission the 2 that are not current. So an example of how these VM scale sets are always kept current using this automatic updating mechanism. So checking back in on the progress of our scale up operation we initiated from PowerShell, and we can see that we've now got 2 up and running on the current version, 2 that are not on the latest version, and it's slowly bringing that scale set into compliance. Now, while that's finishing up, let's take a look at a scale set I previously deployed that actually contains IIS, and it's a very, very basic web application. In fact, just the default web application. So this is in a resource group called existing scale set. You can see it's got the exact same 4 elements. The difference being that if I actually connect to this scale set, so let's come in and get its public IP address and copy that. We're just going to browse to that public IP. You can see that I actually get a web server. Now, how do you deploy containing a web application? Well, there's a lot of different ways, as we discussed in the video. We're going to take a look at this particular one because it was done using an ARM template along with PowerShell desired state configuration to install the web server as part of the deployment. This one came from one of the Azure Quick Start templates, number 201, Scale Set Windows Web App DSC with Auto Scale. And if we look at the contents, we're going to go back up one level here. And let's take a look. I want to go up one level, this guy right here. We can see that it actually has a DSC folder which contains a zip file, and inside that zip file is just a small bit of PowerShell DSC script that will deploy, essentially install IIS. On the deployment code, if I look at Azure deploy.json, look at the raw, there we go. And we're going to scroll all the way down through this. When we get to our variable section, you'll see that there's a couple of variables, web package deploy full path, PowerShell DSC path, PowerShell DSC folder and file name. So that actually references those files for PowerShell DSC. And then when we scroll down to the operating system installation section, which is right around here. I think I missed it. Zoom this in just a little bit. Here we go, right here. So here's the actual virtual machine definition that contains the VM profile, computer name, admin, password, etc. All our VM properties, network properties, IP configuration, etc. Load balancers it's connected to. We have the extensions. Now remember, if you recall our sections on virtual machines, we can actually include VM extensions as part of virtual machine deployment. And what we're doing in here is using the PowerShell DSC to simply apply a DSC package that installs IIS. And so this could, this particular example uses a very simple package that just adds IIS, but you can create a DSC package to install IIS, make any configuration changes you want, including load whatever application files you might have. So just wanted to take a second and show you that within the context of the marketplace, you can deploy a basic virtual machine. You can then further automate that if you want, or you can include the automation to install the application in the virtual machine scale set using something like an ARM template and the PowerShell DSC extension. And to help you learn that, there is this example that's available on the Azure Quick Start templates that does just that. You can take this, clone it, modify the DSC file, and then create whatever custom scale set configuration you want.